The following video is going to be a full critique of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. That means I will be going through almost everything the game has to offer, only skipping over some things that I don't have a lot to say about. This video is coming from someone who never grew up with the original Final Fantasy VII, but has played it twice. Once last year, and a second time in preparation for this video. I have no nostalgia for the original game, but I respect it and the cultural impact surrounding it. This video will not be a direct comparison between the two games, but I will draw comparisons where I feel they are needed. I will mainly be focusing on Final Fantasy VII Remake as a game in its own right, and since this game is still pretty new, this will be your spoiler warning now. I know it may sound a bit strange to put up a warning for a story that is over 20 years old, especially since it's only what's amounted to the first 5 hours of the original story, but while this game still is a remake, there is plenty of original content here that, well, we'll get to that when we get to that. Final Fantasy VII Remake starts off by showing us the evolution of the city of Midgar, the game's main location. Think of Midgar as an oil platform, but instead of digging for oil, it digs deep into the planet so it can suck up energy from something called the life stream, or Mako energy. Midgar also functions as a massive city divided into 8 layers, with an upper and lower layer, each layer having their own Mako reactor for sucking up energy on the top layer of each sector. We flash forward an unknown amount of time to where the city has been fully completed and are immediately thrown into action. A train pulls up and a group of people take out the surrounding soldiers before we're introduced to our main character. This is Cloud Strife. Cloud is a mercenary and an ex-soldier that was hired to help the resistance fighters called Avalanche to assist them in a mission to blow up one of the Mako reactors. A soldier in the world of Final Fantasy VII is someone who is injected with the Mako energy that is being sucked up from the planet. Mako energy can alter a human and grant them superhuman abilities, making them a deadly fighter. We get some gameplay here, but I'll talk about that later to not overload you with information. The entire point of this opening is to set up and explain the character motivations and relationships. We're introduced to Avalanche and their leader, Barret. Avalanche is against the company known as Shinra. Shinra is the company in charge of collecting Mako energy from the planet and distributing it as electricity to the city of Midgar. Going off what is explained in this opening, Shinra has been sucking up too much Mako energy from the planet, and that will cause problems in the near future as, without Mako energy, the planet will die. Barret is taking a stand against the Shinra company, and we see his passion towards this cause. He hypes up not only himself, but his teammates with his speeches. Compare this to Cloud, who is very clearly only in it for the payment and doesn't care about the planet. These contrasting ideals make for an interesting partnership, even if it's only temporary. We also get some really good banter between the two men.
You think if we fell in, we'd sink right down to the bottom? To the planet's core?
No. The pump would suck us back up.
How come?
This opening also presents us with our first choice. You need to decide to set the bomb to blow up in either 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I'll talk about the choices in their entirety real quick because they don't have a huge impact on the game overall. Just like in the original Final Fantasy VII, there are dialogue options or decisions you can make to alter your playthrough slightly. Most of this was to aid the hidden relationship system where you can potentially go on dates with any of the female party members, or Barret. The spirit behind this system was kept for the remake but is expanded ever so slightly. To briefly jump ahead a bit, setting the timer to 20 minutes will show Jessie that you're brave and she'll reward you with some items. There is also a question the character Tifa will ask that will affect the dress she's wearing in a later chapter of the game. The most substantial differences will appear in Chapter 9, where by picking certain dialogue options, you can alter which side quests will appear. I'll go into more detail later, but I thought it was worth mentioning now. With the bomb set, the group escapes the factory with little time to spare. It's revealed that Shinra has been spying on Avalanche since they entered the factory, and they order their own machines to fire at the Mako reactor, causing the explosion to be much greater than what Avalanche intended. This version of the bombing mission was a great update to the original. It managed to recreate some of the iconic energy while not being too self-indulgent in its own past glory, which is why it pains me to say that the pacing of the following chapters kills this excitement. That's not to say that the pacing immediately grinds to a halt at the start of Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is fantastic because it adds to the world building and really makes Avalanche question if what they're doing is right. We, as Cloud, have to go through the destroyed streets of Sector 8. Cloud himself doesn't care about the effects of the Sector 8 bombing, he only cares about getting paid. So this is more so for the player to question the morals of Avalanche. Sure, they operate for a force of good, but Barret describes the collateral damage as a necessary evil to take down Shinra. In a later mission, we even have to disable the sun lamps above Sector 4 slums. These lamps are what simulate sunlight for anyone in the slums. Tifa expresses her concerns for the people, but Barret says that it doesn't matter since they're going to be blowing up the reactor anyways. This shows that he's willing to get his hands dirty for the cause regardless of Shinra trying to put the blame on them. But that doesn't mean that I think Barret doesn't care about the people around him. He genuinely cares about his small team and even gets worried when Cloud doesn't show up to the rendezvous.
You had me worried for a minute. What the hell you been up to, huh?
It's important to mention that just because we know that Shinra purposely sabotaged themselves, that doesn't mean the characters have this information. Jessie puts the blame on herself for what happened since she used a stronger blasting agent than necessary, so the characters seeing the damage that they potentially caused themselves does a good job at humanizing Avalanche. There's a lot more content focused on the Avalanche members later, so I'll save most of my thoughts until then. As for the rest of Chapter 2, it sets up a few key elements to the story, the first one being Cloud's visions of a man named Sephiroth. Even if you haven't played Final Fantasy VII before this remake, you most likely at least have heard of Sephiroth. That's something that Square also must think because they certainly play up Sephiroth's appearance. Not much is explained to the player about who he is, however, other than some implied history between the two, and he vanishes as quickly as he showed up, only giving vague advice to Cloud. Cloud makes his way through the burning city and comes across a woman who was chased out of an alleyway by some invisible force. Before Cloud can do anything, he's startled by another vision of Sephiroth, taunting him that he can't save anyone. Cloud's migraine stops when this flower girl begins to speak to him. This is Aerith from the Sector 5 slums, and she's grateful to Cloud for scaring away the things that were chasing her. Cloud has no idea what she's talking about and warns her to leave him alone. The conversation is cut short, however, when Aerith grabs Cloud's hand out of fear, and we are shown the strange entities that Aerith was mentioning earlier. Not only that, but Shinra's soldiers also arrive on the scene, but they don't seem to react to these creatures. Aerith decides to make her leave and the cloaked creatures follow suit, leaving Cloud to deal with the Shinra soldiers. Since the remainder of Chapter 2 is all gameplay, I believe it's time to talk about the combat for a bit. Modern Final Fantasy games have been wanting to be anything but turn-based, and I have no doubt that hearing that the remake of Final Fantasy VII will also be ditching the turn-based combat system probably made some people worried, but I think that this combat system has successfully reached a happy medium of being an action RPG while incorporating strategic mechanics. By pressing the square button, you are able to attack with your basic strikes. As you attack the enemy, your blue gauge beneath your health bar will increase. This is the ATB gauge from the original game. When your ATB gauge reaches one threshold, you're able to spend it to do an advanced action. Using an item, casting magic, and using your character's special abilities will cost at the very least one ATB bar. Some of the more damaging abilities, such as Cloud's Infinity's End attack, will cost 2 ATB bars because of how devastating the attack is. How you manage your ATB meter is one of the most important factors in the combat system. There's inherently more of a risk factor now when performing actions because they are susceptible to being interrupted. Magic especially now is a greater risk, but the payoff can be devastating. You need to spend 1 ATB bar and the required MP in order to cast a spell of your choice, but at the same time, the level of spell that you use will determine the casting time. A very powerful magic spell like Thundaga will require a few seconds of charge up before the spell is even casted, which means they need to be absolutely sure that you can fire off the spell so you don't waste the MP. Little consequences like this make you consider actually using weaker magic instead of only relying on your heavy fire. Every character also has a faster way of filling ATB with their unique abilities. For Cloud, he enters an alternate fighting stance called Punisher mode. His attacks are much quicker and do more damage alongside filling up his ATB faster. Instead of guarding, he now counterattacks if attacked when holding the R1 button. The downside to this mode is that Cloud's movement speed is slowed down significantly and there's a long windup to his attacks. This is also a good way to pressure enemies and increase the small orange gauge beneath their health bar. The meta goal, in a sense, for every battle is to fill up this bar enough so the enemy becomes staggered. When you stagger an enemy, they receive 160% damage for a short period of time. This works wonders against bigger enemies as they take very little damage when they aren't staggered. The best way to fill up the stagger meter is to take advantage of an enemy's elemental weakness, as well as using specific attacks that will fill up the stagger meters faster when the enemy is pressured. Pressuring an enemy varies between specific enemy types. Some may only need to take a certain amount of damage before they enter the pressured state, while some others need to be hit with certain kinds of magic, or even attacking specific points of their body. That doesn't mean that pressuring an enemy is the only way to quickly fill up their staggered meter, as some of them are less resistant to specific types of melee attacks, making them easier to stagger in general. Most of the smaller enemies don't need to be staggered at all to finish them off, such as the basic Shinra grunts that you fight in the early chapters. The battle system quickly becomes a balancing act of both managing your ATB meter as well as filling up the enemy's stagger meter. It's all about knowing when to spend your ATB to lay on the attacks to stagger the enemies, while at the same time not using too much of your ATB so you don't miss the opportunity to do some serious damage. This is where your party members come into the picture. Cloud isn't the only one that is capable of standing up against Shinra's army, as he's joined by a few other controllable characters. As you saw in Chapter 1, the leader of the Avalanche group, Barrett Wallace, is the first party member you use. He specializes in long-distance combat, and he uses a Gatling gun attached to his arm to deal light damage from safe zones. You can switch between who you control in the party with the D-pad. It's important to switch to different party members because whoever you're directly in control in will gain their ATB faster. You also need to be controlling the other party members to use their special abilities. Barrett's overcharge move can't be used unless you're in control of him. Overcharge is a 4-burst fire that deals greater damage and significantly fills his ATB. You have to wait until the overcharge meter fills up again before you can use it, but you can speed up the process by using the charge command. If one of your party members has a filled up ATB meter but you don't want to be in control of that party member, you can issue commands through the tactical menu. The tactical menu slows down time to a near crawl to give you a lot of time to think about how you want to spend your ATB meter. You can select actions for any characters that has at least one ATB bar filled and tell them to do a specific move you're choosing. Remotely controlling party members can prove to be much more beneficial than constantly switching characters because enemies tend to target the character you're directly in control of. So if you want to use any magic that has a long cast time, it may be in your best interest to save it until you know the party member is in the clear to use it. The basics of the battle system comes down to switching between different party members to fill up their ATB meters, while at the same time staggering enemies so you can deal massive damage. There's a lot more to manage than initially expected, and that's not even going into what roles you can customize your party members to be, such as making Barrett your damage absorbing tank so everyone else can take a beating without much worry. As of right now, the battle system may take a bit to get the hang of, but this comes with the benefit of always being on your toes and constantly thinking. Even smaller enemies can give you troubles if you're unable to adapt to their unique traits. Not every encounter is stellar, however, as some can be downright tedious or clunky, such as when you're forced to fight flying enemies with characters that specialize in close range attacks. Chapter 2 finishes with Cloud narrowly avoiding the Shinra soldiers chasing him by using the train passing by to escape. I can only assume that this was intentional by Cloud because this was the same train that he and Avalanche were supposed to rendezvous at. The remainder of this chapter is meant for contextualizing some information, stuff like what the Mako reactors are used for and how people who live in the slums don't have the luxury to leave Midgar if they wanted to. It shows Barrett's more sympathetic side in case you're on the edge about him being a maniac. I briefly alluded to this earlier, but Chapter 3 starts the trend of some chapters being dedicated to little story content and a lot of busy work. The amount of story in this chapter is very minimal. Cloud and the rest of Avalanche meet up at a bar called the Seventh Heaven, which is run by another major character, Tifa Lockhart. This is also where we're briefly introduced to Barrett's daughter, Marlene. When Cloud requests Tifa for his payment, she hands him 500 gil, which is only a quarter of the money promised to him. Apparently, most of the money that was supposed to be going towards Cloud's payment was used to get supplies for the bombing mission itself. She assures him that she'll have the remainder of the money the next day, once she collects payments from the water filter replacements from everyone in the small town. Tifa requests Cloud's assistant, but then she realized that she would owe him more money for his services. Cloud interrupts her with this.
No, 2,000's enough. That's what we agreed on, so that'll be the price. With what you gave me, that leaves 1,500.
This alone says a lot about Cloud and Tifa's relationship. There's a lot of implied history between the two adults. Cloud is willing to give an extra hand to Tifa because the two grew up together and are close friends. We don't see it in Chapter 3, but Tifa even made Cloud promise her something back before he left to join Soldier when he was younger. She wanted Cloud to come back and save her if she was ever in any danger. Those who've played the original game know that there's a lot more history between these two characters shown later in the game. Since the remake only covers the Midgar stuff, we sadly only get the basics of it, though there is some foreshadowing to events that I can only assume later Final Fantasy Remake parts will address. I'll go into more detail when this becomes more relevant in the story because there is one drastic change later on that will have a major effect on the story going forward. Cloud is awoken by his neighbor groaning about something, and when he goes to check on him, he's greeted by Sephiroth. Sephiroth tackles Cloud to the ground and he struggles to get him off. Tifa rushes out after hearing the commotion and Cloud warns her to stay back. Cloud readies his sword, and before he can strike Sephiroth, he grabs Cloud's leg and he begins to hallucinate. We're shown a vision of an army of cloaked figures marching towards something while chanting about the reunion. When Cloud snaps back to reality, Sephiroth is gone and a cloaked man is in his place. Tifa tells Cloud that this cloaked man is named Marco. Marco isn't a bad guy, but he does have some problems. It's implied to be Mako poisoning, which is this world's version of radiation poisoning. The following day, Cloud and Tifa make their way around the Sector 7 slums to collect payments. This is supposed to be a bit of a guide to show you where the different shops are for buying weapons and items. I don't really think this is necessary, as the Sector 7 slums are already pretty compact, and just by looking around you can find any shop you need in no time. During this tour, Tifa introduces Cloud to the Neighborhood Watch, run by Biggs and Wedge from Avalanche. Cloud and Tifa end up taking on a job for the two, so Cloud can get his name as a mercenary out there since no one will hire a nobody for work. It's a nice piece of world building actually explaining Cloud's mercenary job. Cloud was also a mercenary in the original game, but it didn't matter much to the overall plot other than just being a fact about his character. So, in an attempt to expand Cloud's character and provide more context to the remake, side quests have been added to specific chapters in the game. Chapter 3, Chapter 8, and Chapter 14 have dedicated hubs for side missions. Chapter 9 features side missions as well, but the ones you get depend on certain choices you make during the chapter, so you won't get all of them in one playthrough. I don't have a lot to say about the side quests individually, so I'll just give my thoughts on them now. Without a doubt, these side quests are the most underwhelming part of the game. There are 25 side quests in total, and I only think that 3 of them are what I would consider to be good. The rest I would lump into being uninteresting or just plain boring. The term I would use to sum up these side quests would be busy work, both figuratively and literally. Most quests end up just being an excuse to get into more combat scenarios, and I enjoy the combat, but there's a lack of any interesting stories or character interactions. There's only one side quest I can think of where we get to see another side of Cloud. There's a quest where the children of Sector 5 slums complain to Cloud that there's a Toad King in their hideout. The kids want Cloud to kill the Toad King for them, but Cloud says that it's going to cost them a lot of gil. The kids don't want to ask the other adults for help because if they do, they'll lose their hideout if anyone else knew about it. Cloud sees that the kids are distressed about their situation, and he says this.
I'll do it for 3 gil.
Huh?
I'm offering a special discount right now on Toad King jobs. Looks like it's your lucky day.
We see a new side of Cloud's character that isn't relevant to the main plot. It's a real bummer because this is the only time in the game we get something like this from a quest. The rest of the quest can be boiled down to going to the location and fighting the enemies that's there, or just glorified fetch quests. Neither of these are particularly hard or engaging. There's 2 exceptions, however, and they are my favorite quests in the game. In Chapter 14, there are 2 side missions that introduce new enemies that serve as some of the most engaging and fun encounters in the game, both of which were a pleasant surprise. There's one where you have to backtrack through the sewer system that you needed to explore for a main quest to fight a monster. This one was great just from the build-up alone. The closer you get to the destination, the louder you can hear it roar. You even get a warning before squeezing through the door. You get to fight this game's version of a behemoth, and it's actually a really good challenge. Behemoths are large and super aggressive. The best way to stagger a behemoth is to weaken both its upper and lower body. I highly recommend that you don't cast any magic on a behemoth because it will always counter with the flare spell, which does massive damage if you're caught in the blast. The other one was great just from the surprise alone. Cloud, Tifa, and Barret encounter a group of hoodlums that are working under the mob boss, Don Corneo. Cloud had a previous scrap with these goons, and they are satisfied to unleash their brand new weapon of destruction of Avalanche. This little guy is called a Tonberry, and it's one of the most infamous enemies from the original Final Fantasy VII. Tonberry's main gimmick in both the original game and the remake is that it's a slow-moving creature with a devastating attack. Once the Tonberry is in melee range, you need to watch out because its little knife is able to instantly kill anyone who's hit by it. Just like the behemoth, the best way to take care of the Tonberry is to stagger it. The method involves a lot of risks to it as you need to make sure the Tonberry misses his knife strike by hanging around him to bait it out. If the Tonberry misses, it becomes pressured, making it easier to fill up its stagger meter. The Tonberry isn't a pushover either because it has many counterattacks for trying to cheese it. If you try using ranged attacks, the Tonberry will freeze you in place and slowly makes its way towards whoever did the attack. It's honestly terrifying having this guy waddle towards you. Sadly, no other quests compared to these 2 since the majority of them are about as interesting as looking for cats for a little girl.
This sucks.
The last quest I enjoyed is linked to Chapter 9, so I'll talk about it later because having context is important for that one. Another decent chunk of game time can be dedicated to Chadley and his research. I don't really count this as a side quest, but more so as a tutorial that has some really cool rewards that you can earn. Chadley here wants Cloud to collect combat data from him, and in return, he can develop materia that you can use in battle. This combat data can be as simple as staggering enemies a certain amount of time, assessing what an enemy is weak to, or even fighting simulations of different summons to unlock them for yourself. I think that this is great because the Chadley requests are something you can gradually pick at while you play the game. Plus, the rewards you get are significantly better than the side missions. You can get some really powerful magic and passive skills from filling out these requests. It's even how you get the enemy skill Materia, one of the more iconic abilities in the original game. Though I didn't really find it super useful this time around because there's only 4 enemy skills to learn instead of the 24 crazy skills from the original game. I guess I may as well talk about it now since I'm on the subject. Materia is a very important aspect of Final Fantasy VII, both in the original and in the remake. Materia is an equipable item that grants the character you equip it to the abilities tied to the materia. Think of it like this. Every spell in the game has materia associated with it. Spells like Thunder, Blizzard, Cure, and so on all have their own piece of materia associated with them. You need to equip materia to your weapons or armor in order to use their effects. Equipping materia will also give you small stat boosts, such as giving that character 1 extra MP or raising their defense slightly. If you want to use a skill like Assess, so you can fill out Chadley's requests, you need to make sure that you have at least one person in your party with the Assess materia. Just like the rest of the combat system, it requires you to use at least one ATB meter with the character that has the materia on them for the person to use that ability. Whenever you defeat an enemy, you earn a small amount of AP as well as the usual XP. AP is the main source of growth for the materia that is currently equipped to the party. You see, materia can also level up, just like your party. Whenever a materia's level increases, different things can happen. For attack spells such as Thunder, Fire, Blizzard, and Arrow, the second tier magic is learned, so the lightning materia will have both Thunder and Thundara, and eventually Thundaga. You can switch between the tier spells with the D-pad on the tactics menu. For more situational materia such as Time and Barrier, leveling up those materia will grant you new skills for that particular tree. Time starts off with Haste, a spell that can speed up the rate your party members can fill their ATB meter, but once you level it up, you can get magic skills like Slow and Stop, the former slowing down an enemy of your choosing so it doesn't do any heavy duty attacks as often, and the latter freezing the enemy in place. Barrier will give you magic that raises physical defense briefly, then it gives you a spell to raise magic defense before giving you a spell that raises all defenses. So it's less about getting more powerful skills and more so getting skills that can be used in different situations. The more passive materia, when leveled up, mostly just increases the potency of the buff. HP up materia when leveled up just gives you more HP before, go figure. The most unique materia in the game has to be the blue materia. The big difference in blue materia is that its potential is unlocked when paired with another piece of materia. Certain weapons and armor have these linked materia slots on them. When you place something like the element materia in one slot and the fire materia in a connecting slot on the weapon, you now do a bonus percentage of fire damage to that enemy. Leveling up the element materia will make the effect of the paired materia more potent. However, you can also pair element materia on armor, making it so you take reduced damage from the paired element. Using a mastered element materia on armor will make it so you absorb the damage into health from that element. You only have a limited amount of materia slots at your disposal depending on your equipment. There are some pieces of armor that don't offer a lot in terms of improving your overall stats, but they make up for that by giving you extra materia slots that could possibly be linked. This makes you think a lot more about what you want to bring into battle. How you manage your materia is important. Making sure you pick materia that fits well with your party composition is important. The materia system is a huge part of the combat system in both the original Final Fantasy VII and the remake, but if I'm being honest, I think that the materia system is done a little worse in the remake since there's one key feature that's missing. The original Final Fantasy VII had a very similar materia system, though there are some features that separate the two. For starters, when you equip materia to a character, you do get the stat boosts, but there's also a slight stat penalty when you equip magic. Most of the penalties are very negligible unless you're equipping something like Knights of the Round, which takes a big chunk of HP away from you because of how powerful it is. I don't think that we lose out on much by removing this system and having materia only provide positive buffs, but it was something featured in the original game. A mechanic I am very sad got cut, however, is what happened when you master a materia. When you mastered a materia, that meant it was the strongest it could possibly get, so earning experience wouldn't matter anymore. So, as a reward for mastering the materia, you get a brand new duplicate of the materia you just mastered. This new materia is set back to 0 AP, so you're able to repeat the process as many times as you want to effectively get as many copies of the materia that you want. Want to have multiple copies of Knights of the Round or Double Cut? You can, but it's gonna take a lot of grinding. This feature is completely absent in the remake, and I don't quite understand why that is. I only think that this is something worth mentioning because there's only one copy of the Magnify materia. Magnify is a piece of blue materia that can be paired with any magic skill to give said magic skill an option to target all enemies. It's essentially the remake's version of the All materia, but with a few changes. All materia in the original Final Fantasy VII let you target all enemies or allies a set number of times per battle and weaken the effect of the spell being cast. The more you level up the All materia, the more times you're able to target multiple enemies per battle. Once mastered, the All materia will allow you to target multiple enemies with that spell 5 times per battle. You even get the benefit of having that All materia copied. The Magnify materia that's featured in the remake has the benefit of being able to target multiple enemies or party members an unlimited amount of times per battle. Magnify starts off with a harder nerf than the All materia had because it makes it so that spells are only 40% effective when casting on multiple targets. Leveling up Magnify will eventually make it so that the paired materia will be at 75% potency, which I believe is slightly better than what the All materia would give you. But here's the thing. You're most likely going to pair Magnify with healing materia above all else for a few reasons. Curaga on everyone in your party during the normal game will heal everyone to full HP except maybe Barret. It isn't until post-game when Curaga on the party isn't a full heal, because at that point your max HP will be over 7,000 with the proper materia. There's a dedicated ability materia called Prayer that costs 2 ATB bars to activate. It heals the party, but the kicker with that one is that you're only able to use that in battle. You would have to rely on using Cure multiple times to heal everyone outside of battle, or using items, which would be fine if you're playing on normal mode where MP doesn't matter. Hard mode is a different story. When playing through hard mode, you're not allowed to use items. Rest spots that used to restore HP and MP now only restore HP. So the only way to restore MP is by getting lucky and getting some back by breaking these Shinra boxes or waiting around in battle. This makes the prayer materia super useful in combat since it doesn't eat up any MP. But outside of combat, you're going to be relying on cure materia to restore health if you happen to have taken a big beating. So it's essential to keep the Magnify materia on healing so you don't have to waste the MP to heal everyone. Of course, you could just swap materia after every fight, but would you actually want that? I did find some places where it was beneficial to pair Magnify with other materia, especially when grinding for endgame content, but for the majority of the time, Magnify was glued to healing. My second favorite combination with Magnify was pairing it with the Time materia. Casting haste on my entire party made encounters go by much faster. I don't really understand why there was only one copy of Magnify materia in the entire game. Even in the original Final Fantasy VII, it was possible to get 3 all materias before the end of the Midgar section. I don't think it would have been overpowered if we just got one more Magnify materia since it needs a lot of AP to be mastered. It's not a huge deal, but I do think that it's a bit limiting. The materia system is very robust and it may seem a bit daunting at first, but it's pretty easy to understand once you get your feet wet. While the remake has a very similar materia system to the original game, I actually prefer the system in that one. That's not to say I dislike the materia system in this game, I just think that the copy system from the original game is fucking brilliant and rewards you for grinding. The reason why I wanted to talk about the materia system now is because of how uninteresting Chapter 3 actually is. If you do complete all the side quests in Chapter 3, Tifa will invite Cloud back to her apartment. When the two arrive, she asks him what happened after he left their hometown when they were kids.
Well, when we were kids, everybody wanted to be a soldier, right?
Yeah, I remember they were on the news every day during the war.
Thing is, by the time I finally made it in, they didn't need heroes anymore. It was nothing like what we dreamt of. It was just working for Shinra.
It's a very touchy subject for Cloud, and in the context of this game, it isn't explained, nor do I think it's necessary to do. This just works as planting seeds for what happened in the later half of the original Final Fantasy VII. Tifa, while trying to change the subject, suggests that her and Cloud go out for a night on the town. She asks Cloud what kind of outfit would suit her for the occasion, and you're presented with a choice. As I said earlier, this choice has an effect on what dress she'll wear in Chapter 9. You can end Chapter 3 by returning to the bar once you complete at least one side quest. The members of Avalanche all attend a meeting in their hideout underneath the bar. Cloud is excluded because he's not officially part of the team. Jessie tries to assure him that he'll be hired again for the next job because she feels safer with him rather than having Tifa on the team. Tifa, while agreeing with the intentions of Avalanche, isn't a fan of their practices. There's not a whole lot to this side of Tifa, and it's only brought up a couple times and not much is done with it. We do get to see that she wants to keep the casualties as low as they can be during a later point in the game, but that's the last time we ever see something like this. Even after a huge tragedy happens much later in the game, all it does is reaffirm her grudge against Shinra. I find this less of a flaw and more so of a missed opportunity for some compelling discourse between Tifa and Barret. The meeting is concluded and Barret lets Cloud know that he's not going to be needed for any more services. Barret pays Cloud the money owed to him and even throws in a little extra. When Cloud leaves 7th Heaven, he runs into Jessie outside of his apartment. She cuts right to the chase and wants to hire him to go to the Sector 7 plate with her so she can get a different blasting agent for the next bomb she's going to make. As a down payment, she gives him an Ifrit summon materia. When Cloud and Jessie go to the train station at night, they're greeted by Biggs and Wedge. It turns out that the train times have changed, and they had a hunch that Jessie was going to the Sector 7 place and she was acting strange. They assumed it was because she wants to go see her parents, and Jessie rolls with it. This is one of the 2 times in the game where you need to do this motorcycle minigame. The second time is at the end of Chapter 17. The motorcycle was also a minigame in the original Final Fantasy VII that appears near the end of the Midgar section, and I honestly prefer it a lot more there. This action set piece goes on for a bit too long in my opinion in the remake, and it's also pretty repetitive. You drive next to the enemy on any of your sides and thwack them with your sword. It takes a couple of hits to knock them off their bikes. There are some special attacks you can perform that function off of a cooldown timer. It's a pretty shallow piece of gameplay that is functional, if somewhat boring. We get to see a glimpse of another member of Soldier. This is Roche. He's brand new to the remake, and just by looking at the way he rides his motorcycle, he wouldn't be out of place in Devil May Cry. Cloud manages to best Roche at this roadside duel. Roche retreats with excitement as he wants to battle Cloud again another day. Something interesting is that depending on how well you do in this action set piece, Jessie will give you a different reaction. She'll either make fun of your driving, or she'll give you a kiss on the cheek as a job well done. The Sector 7 plate is a brand new location in the remake, which is pretty cool. According to Jessie, this is where the people who work for Shinra stay and are provided housing. Jessie's parents live here because her dad works for Shinra, but he's suffering from Mako poisoning and has been in a coma for an unknown amount of time. Shinra overworked Jessie's dad to the point where he passed out inside the Mako reactor next to the Mako storage. He was apparently left in there for hours before anyone found him, and the fumes from the Mako storage gave him Mako poisoning. This was a shock to Jessie because she heard the news on the opening night of her first play at the Gold Saucer. She ended up abandoning her dream of becoming an actress and became interested in planetology, which is how she discovered Avalanche. Most of this information comes from Biggs and Wedge during Chapter 4 when Jessie goes on ahead, since this is a touchy subject for her. You even see Jessie's dad in a comatose state when Cloud has to sneak into Jessie's mom's house to steal her dad's Shinra ID card. This is a good reminder of how Shinra is not only destroying the planet, but they're also damaging innocents, so we, as Cloud, have even more incentive to strike Shinra down even if Cloud says it's just for pay. Something that the remake does a little bit is showing us a different perspective of the effects of Shinra's practices. At the start of Chapter 3, someone tears down Avalanche propaganda because they believe what Shinra is doing is necessary for progress. You can even overhear conversations people hold about Avalanche and if what they're doing is right or not. It's not super deep or changes the plot in any way, but it works as a neat piece of world building. Since Chapter 4 has a heavy focus on Jessie, I think it's time to talk about the massive overhaul that her character got. I've heard some very mixed things about Jessie's new character, so before I give my opinion, I'll give a brief rundown on what's changed. Jessie in the original Final Fantasy VII didn't get a whole lot of dialogue because she was very unimportant to the story that game was trying to tell. Her whole character was that she was the one who makes the explosives Avalanche uses on their missions. Since the remake dedicates more screen time to Avalanche, the group's personalities were fleshed out. Jessie was giving a backstory of her wanting to become an actress at the Gold Saucer, which is an amusement park that exists outside of Midgar. Her personality has been altered to be a lot more flirtatious towards Cloud, and only rarely do we get to see the more serious side of her. This is something I have a problem with because most of the time, her character is treated as a one-note gag. I guess her flirting is an endearing trait, but it got old really quick and should have been reeled back so we get to see what Jessie thinks about the current situation. Very rarely do we get to see that. Hell, it's the whole reason Chapter 4 exists, but Chapter 4 is the last time we see Jessie before a major event involving these characters. I feel more disappointed with her than I do Biggs and Wedge because Jessie was clearly intended to be the Avalanche member you're supposed to care about the most. All three of the members are supporting characters, but there was a bigger focus on Jessie than there was with Biggs and Wedge, who I ironically ended up connecting with more. Hell, we even learn about Wedge more than we do Jessie. That doesn't mean that I think Avalanche fails as a group, as when all three of them are together, their interactions are pretty good. There's a lot of implied history between this small group from what Biggs and Wedge tell Cloud, while they make their way to the Shinra storage area. The friendship this group has is very believable, which I think is much more important than the individual characters, but Jessie being the most one-note of the group is disappointing. Cloud hands off the Shinra ID card to Jessie and she splits up from the rest of the group to get what she needs. Cloud, Biggs, and Wedge are going to be the diversion for the Shinra guards so Jessie can get what she needs from the warehouse. Cloud and the others rush in once Jessie shoots her signal into the sky. This is the first battle in the game that lets you use your summon materia that you got from Jessie. Each member of your party has a dedicated materia slot for one summon materia, but only one summon can be used per battle. You can only activate summon materia during certain battles, but when you do, you have a new ally on the battlefield. Summons attack on their own, but you can spend any member's ATB gauge to get the summon to do their unique abilities. Once the summon meter depletes or the summoner is defeated, the summon will use its ultimate attack that cannot miss or be blocked. Every summon has their own defining attribute that makes it stand out. Ifrit focuses on fire, Chocobo Mog focuses on wind and is great for staggering enemies. Summons aren't overpowered either, but they can greatly swing the battle in your favor if you know how to take advantage of their abilities. Once you destroy enough of the Shinra troops, Roche will arrive on the scene and challenge Cloud to a battle. This is the first one-on-one battle, and I think it does a pretty good job at getting the player used to these types of encounters. Roche will leave himself open whenever he does his forward stab, which is when you should lay the damage on him. After doing enough physical damage, Roche will become pressured so you can easily fill up his stagger meter. Roche is also weak to fire damage, which is an easy way to interrupt his attacks. With Roche taken out of commission once again, he makes a retreat. Sadly, this is the last time we see Roche in the game. I'm serious, after this, Roche is gone from the game. So this feels like it's meant to be a setup for future installments. I think that this is fine here since he isn't important to the overall story and serves as an interesting character that I wanted to see more of. Though, this trend of introducing characters before they're dropped is something prominent in the story. More on that later. The group makes a hasty retreat when members of another corps of Avalanche arrive and things start to get a little bit hairy. Cloud, Biggs, and Wedge meet up with Jessie and it turns out Wedge was shot in the ass. A little exchange happens that I think is pretty entertaining.
Really? Let me see.
Are we seriously doing this here? That's... wow.
You guys are the worst!
Huh? Your ass is fine. Maybe singed, but the only casualty is your underwear. This is like a bruise or a mild burn at worst.
Now that was a gunshot.
We see that Cloud is starting to warm up to this little group, even if he is in it for the money. This isn't just a sudden shift either, because he still has his own priorities, but nevertheless, it's cool to see. This mission helped Cloud become more comfortable around his comrades because when he gets back to his apartment and talks to Tifa, he's much more open to having her talk about anything that's bothering her. There's this interaction with Jessie where she invites Cloud to come over for dinner for the following night, and you can make it so Cloud is somewhat open to the idea. It's a bit of a pointless decision in the grand scheme of things because this is the very last time Cloud is in the Sector 7 slums for the rest of the game, but if you happen to take any interest in Jessie from what you saw of her, the choice is there. Cloud's sleep is interrupted suddenly by those strange creatures that appeared when he first met Aerith. Tifa quickly gets Cloud out of bed and the two make their way to the 7th Heaven bar where Barret and Jessie are fighting off the creatures. While Cloud and Tifa are fighting these invaders, Jessie is knocked down and swarmed by a group of them. Suddenly, the specters are no longer hostile and leave the area as fast as they arrived. Cloud helps Jessie into the bar and it turns out that her leg got messed up in the attack. Rather than calling off the mission, Barret decides to hire Cloud once again to join them. Cloud agrees but makes it clear that he wants a bit more money this time. Even though the team is slightly different, the plan is still the same. Avalanche will infiltrate Reactor 5 and blow it to high heaven just like they did to Reactor 8. The following chapters are mostly just gameplay, so I'll quickly mention some things that I haven't talked about yet. This is where you really get a chance to test out Tifa as a party member. She's a physical attacker, much like Cloud, but the difference between the two is vast. While Cloud is a medium speed heavy hitter, Tifa focuses on doing quick combos and buffing herself up with her unique abilities. I'd say Tifa's greatest strength is how she can fill up the stagger meter on enemies quickly, while also providing some good damage with her special attacks. Her unique ability changes based on how many times she buffed herself up. When an enemy is staggered and she uses her unique ability, she can increase the stagger damage multiplier. So if you do this while also issuing commands to other party members, you can decimate foes with good ATB management. Having 3 party members is when the combat system shines the most because you're always actively picking things for your teammates to do while switching between characters. It's at this point where you might realize how the areas you travel through were expanded. When you run through the train tunnel in the original game before passing the underside of the Sector 4 plate, it only takes about a minute to do with no random encounters. This was expanded and stretched into being at least an hour and a half. That doesn't mean that it was stretched in the way of being repetitive, as they either offer interesting encounters and have some opportunities for exploration to find goodies, whether that's just some items, armor, or even some materia that can only be found once, like Magnify. However, there are some pacing issues with the level design. There are multiple sections that have you slowly shimmy your way through cracks, walk slowly over planks of wood, or even just slow your movement down to a crawl. I believe this has to do with technical limitations of the PlayStation 4. The environments usually look gorgeous and run at a locked 30 frames per second, which is really impressive for something of this scale. But there are multiple times where movement is intentionally slowed to a crawl to mask loading screens, and it gets very annoying because this happens more frequently than you'd think. It's not enough that it kills the game flow, but it's annoying enough that I felt the need to mention it. Cloud, Tifa, and Barret manage to get inside Reactor 5 with only some hangups. But before Cloud can plant the bomb, he begins to have another flashback to an unknown time where Tifa is sobbing over the death of her father. Cloud is brought back to reality and decides not to tell Tifa what he just remembered. The difference in this bomb is that it's remote detonation rather than a timer. As the group attempts to leave through the way they came, they're stopped by a small drone setup that reveals a hologram of Harbinger. Harbinger explains that Shinra is broadcasting this Mako reactor raid to the citizens and framing it as a terrorist attack, which is true, but Shinra is purposely leaving out the context of this situation. Harbinger also lets Avalanche know that they will be marching out to their deaths as they will be using their latest machine, the Airbuster, to execute the group on television. Barrett decides that this is actually a blessing in disguise because if they're able to take down the Airbuster live, then Avalanche will also have the opportunity to spread their message to the masses. Cloud and Tifa agree, so they all make their way to the reactor entrance. Along the way, you'll have to go through different control rooms with pretty interesting gameplay opportunity to weaken the Airbuster. You find keycards around the area that can be used to delay the shipment of components, so the Airbuster will be weaker when you fight the boss. It's a pretty interesting mechanic, but you have a limited amount of choices you can make. I feel as though if you're going to invest any cards into getting rid of the components, you may as well just invest all of your cards into one component type. From testing, I didn't notice a difference between taking away only some of the components. Rather, there was only effect if you took away all of one type of component. The boss battle against the Airbuster is what I'd consider to be the first major boss battle in the game. Their Airbuster's only weakness is lightning magic, which also feels the stagger gauge faster than any other attacks. The most annoying part about this boss battle is when the Airbuster flies very far away from the platform you're supposed to be fighting it on. At that point, Barrett is the only capable member of the team that can do constant damage due to his ranged attacks. Sure, you can use lightning magic with any other party member because the range doesn't matter with magic, but that drains MP very quickly and the ATB meter charges slowly when not laying on damage with characters' physical attacks. Sometimes, the Airbuster will fly in close enough for party members to deal damage, but it doesn't happen all the time. The fight becomes very tedious at that point, but at least the Ifrit summon can help alleviate this a bit because his ultimate attack does some decent damage. The Airbuster explodes after being defeated, causing Tifa and Barrett to get thrown back. Cloud isn't as lucky as he's in a sticky situation. Cloud tells the others to leave him behind because he can take care of himself. Barrett drags Tifa away and Cloud falls off the Sector 5 plate when an explosion from the Mako reactor makes him lose his grip. Cloud awakens in a church, somehow surviving his fall, and is greeted by Aerith from Chapter 2. It turns out that the flower bed Cloud landed on is Aerith's hobby garden. As the two begin to talk, Cloud has a strange vision what seems to be Aerith praying and the materia falling into the lake. If you've played the original Final Fantasy VII, then you know exactly what this scene is supposed to be. Cloud and Aerith's conversation is cut short, however, as a red-haired man with a bunch of Shinra goons enters the church. This is Reno. He's a member of the team called the Turks. Think of the Turks as Shinra's version of the Mafia. The Turks are contracted into doing any sort of job from Shinra, whether that be big or small. Reno here has been contracted into securing Aerith and bringing her to Shinra HQ. That alone doesn't sound good. Aerith wants Cloud to be her bodyguard and says that she'll go on a date with him if he does. Cloud, seeing that the Turks are only for important missions, decides to keep her away from Shinra. Cloud manages to beat Reno, but before he can lay the killing blow, the mysterious specters from earlier swoop Cloud and Aerith away from Reno and into the back of the church. This is where some questions were raised for me when I was playing the game for the first time. The specters at this point seem a lot less hostile than they were before. In fact, they're actually protecting Aerith this time, which buys the two enough time to escape through the top of the church. Cloud and Aerith make their way across the rooftops, run into more Shinra security, including another member of the Turks named Rude. Aerith suggests that the two take the back streets, even though there's a risk of monsters. This is where you get a good feel as how Aerith plays as a party member. Aerith is the best magic user in the game. Her magic attack stat and MP is the highest out of every party member in the game. Aerith's trade-off is that she has low HP. She's essentially the glass cannon of the group. A lot of her unique abilities are buffs to the other party members, such as speeding up the ATB charging rate for anyone in the ward circle. She does have some damaging attacks though, such as Ray of Judgment, which is a constant stream of magic that builds up the stagger like crazy. Aerith can be really good if you load her up with the right materia, and is the go-to healer of the group. Aerith has the unique property of her basic attacks always counting as magic damage. This can be both good and bad depending on the scenario. If an enemy is immune to magic, then Aerith is essentially out of the picture and will be dedicated to purely healing. Her basic attacks are also the slowest in the game, having the most windup. Aerith can be very powerful if you know how to use her correctly, but that doesn't mean that she'll always be the most powerful party member. She just has the potential of being one of the strongest. Aerith gets a lot of characterization but lacks any sort of arc. This is fine because the story doesn't draw attention to any sort of inner struggle. She's very snarky and has made it known that she's a very independent woman despite her looks. One of the things I was worried about when it came to the remake was how they would handle Aerith. There was this problem with a lot of Final Fantasy VII extended media where the writers sort of romanticized this messiah-like figure Aerith was, and her personality was completely sucked out of her character. Getting Aerith's personality right was one of my biggest concerns, but I think they nailed it here.
You
You worry too much. I'm not some princess who needs to be coddled. Shit.
The remainder of Chapter 8 is very uneventful. Cloud and Aerith return to her house, and Cloud has offered housing for the night, because if Aerith were to help him find his way back to Sector 7 now, it would be dark by the time Aerith got back. So it's pretty much just an excuse to give Chapter 8 its own hub for side missions. Depending on how many side missions you accomplish, there will be effect on something relating to Chapter 9. Like I said earlier, I don't really think the side missions are worth going into detail about, so I won't waste any time here. There is something interesting that happens after Cloud and Aerith rescue some kids, however. Cloud and Aerith stumble across a cloaked man that Cloud thinks is Marco from earlier, but upon getting a closer inspection, he realizes that this man isn't Marco, but he looks very similar. Marco had the number 49 branded on his arm, while this stranger has the number 2 branded. The man grabs Cloud's arm and sits up to be revealed as Sephiroth. Sephiroth tells Cloud that there's no reason to be afraid of the reunion. Cloud has another migraine and Sephiroth has once again disappeared, leaving the cloaked man in his place. It was at this point I started to get annoyed. Something that Final Fantasy VII Remake loves to do is tease events that are important to the full plot through Cloud's visions. This doesn't mean that we're shown plot elements that are important to this game, but it foreshadows events that'll have lasting effects on the story. Showing teases of stuff like Tifa's grudge against Shinra and Soldier, I'm okay with. It's not super important to the story this game is trying to tell and will tease events later to come. What I do have a problem with, however, is Sephiroth being such a key player to the story of the remake, but we know nothing about him. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth's backstory and motivation is explained not too long after he becomes relevant to the story. He's first introduced near the end of the Midgar section of the original game, and is the driving motivation for the gang to even leave the city. Jumping ahead a bit, Sephiroth is still the driving force to get the group to leave Midgar too, but there's a big difference. Sephiroth is actually one of the main antagonists in the story along with Shinra, and disappointingly, we learn next to nothing about who Sephiroth is and what exactly his deal is. And for how often we see him throughout the game, I think that at least having some of his backstory revealed now would at the very least make what's going on less confusing. We don't learn about what the reunion is, or why Cloud keeps seeing Sephiroth, or even what his plan is. As a fan of the original game, I already know all of this stuff because it was explained in that game's story, which was all part of the package. So when I see Sephiroth in this game, I know why that's happening, but if this is your first time playing anything Final Fantasy VII related, you're going to be super confused. This isn't the last time I'll be complaining about this. Trust me, I'll get to it. When Cloud and Aerith return to her house, Aerith's mother, Elmira, sends Aerith upstairs to talk to Cloud alone. She noticed right when Cloud walked in that he was a soldier. Cloud makes it known that he's an ex-soldier, but Elmira doesn't care. She doesn't want anyone with any association with Shinra around her daughter and requests Cloud to leave the house at night when Aerith is asleep. Cloud respects her decision and sneaks out of the house in the middle of the night. He doesn't get far, however, as he runs into Aerith, who seemed to have expected Cloud to try to pull a stunt like this. Cloud begrudgingly lets Aerith guide him back to Sector 7. Chapter 9 does a great job of giving us some bonding time between Cloud and Aerith as they travel to Sector 7. Cloud slowly opens up to Aerith about what he did after he enlisted into Soldier, and she begins to ask him more personal questions, stuff like if he had any war buddies. Aerith's bubbly personality slowly melts Cloud's rough exterior. There are sections where you need to solve environmental puzzles with this robotic arm. You can pick up and place these steel crates, as well as move Aerith around. The goal is to get her to the ladder so she can lower it for Cloud. These puzzles aren't really remarkable, but I only mention them because after Cloud solves each puzzle, Aerith attempts to celebrate with a high five. Cloud dismisses the idea at first, but the moment he does try, this happens.
Huh? Wait a minute, did you just...
Nope.
Don't worry, we'll be on the same page next time.
What are you talking about?
I'm sorry, okay?
Then at the end of the section, you have to hold down the triangle button in order to high-five Aerith. It's just a cute scene between the two that really adds to the characters. Before Cloud can take the sewer shortcut back to Sector 7, his attention is grabbed by a chocobo carriage. He notices that Tifa is in the passenger seat wearing a rather risque dress. This is the payoff for the choice you're given in Chapter 3 once you finish all the side missions. The dress changes depending on the answer you give Tifa. Cloud reasonably runs over to Tifa to see what on earth she's doing. Tifa tells Cloud not to worry about her because she could take care of herself. It turns out that she's going to go see Don Corneo at his personal mansion in Wall Market. Don Corneo is bad news. He's a mob boss that has his grimy fingers all over the Wall Market. Think of the Wall Market like an entertainment center, but instead of being just one building, the entirety of Sector 6 is the party area. Apparently, it was originally built for workers to unwind while the construction of the place was going on. Eventually, it attracted the wrong crowd and more illegal activities went around there. Rather than dealing with the problem themselves, Shinra just walled off the area so it's all contained. Cloud was going to give Tifa the benefit of the doubt and just let her handle her job, but Aerith convinced him to go after Tifa, because she assured him that the dawn was bad news. Cloud and Aerith are able to find out where Corneo's mansion is, but they need to get approval from one of the Corneo scouts in order for Aerith to go inside. Eventually, they manage to track down one of the scouts, Madame M. She agrees to let Aerith inside Corneo's mansion as long as Cloud and Aerith win a tournament to pay for the dress she has to get for her. Tournaments are about as simple as they sound. You go through multiple rounds of enemies. After each round is cleared, you regenerate 50% of HP and MP. The catch is that you can't use any items in the tournaments, so you have to be wise with how you spend your MP and minimize the damage taken. There are different tournaments you can enter after this mandatory one that can net you some rewards such as new limit breaks, which are your ultimate attacks, and armor. There are some tournament challenges you can only do after you've not only finished the game, but have also done all of Chadley's requests. The final challenge is probably the most difficult part of the entire game, but I'll get to that later. When you bring Aerith back to Madame M, she requests Cloud to leave while Aerith gets her dress stuff sorted out. It's at this point in Chapter 9 where things can diverge a bit. Depending on what dialogue choices you made throughout the chapter, you will unlock unique side quests. One of them is pretty boring. All you do is fight off some goons who stole shipment of supplies for an orphanage. Once you take them out, everything is settled. The other quest, however, will be very familiar for those who played the original Final Fantasy VII. There's an old man in a bar that runs the dress shop who's lost his inspiration in a bet with another guy. This is the start of a side quest that involves you to go to different locations around the wall market, and interestingly enough, you were required to use materia during certain parts as sort of a stat check, such as when you need to get the sauce from one of the vending machines, and you need to use the assess materia to find a secret button. You need to do stuff like this a couple of times, and it's interesting to say the least. It's the only time we need to do anything like this in the game too. I'm not sure what happens if you don't have the stat requirements for this mission, and I was struggling to find any information on it. If anyone knows, please leave a comment. Cloud heads over to Corneo's mansion to drop off Aerith's letter of approval. He's told by one of the bouncers, Leslie, that he has to wait outside when Aerith goes in because there's no men allowed. Cloud isn't comfortable with the idea of Aerith being in there all alone, so he lets her know when he finds her outside of the mansion. Aerith had a feeling that Cloud would say something like that, so she devised a plan. Apparently, Cloud caught the attention of one of Corneo's scouts, Andrea. If Cloud manages to impress Andrea, he'll write Cloud a letter of recommendation. The dress that Aerith is wearing depends on how many side quests you completed in Chapter 8. Cloud heads to the Honeybee Inn to meet with Andrea. In order to get the letter of recommendation, Cloud is going to need to match Andrea in the art of dance. It's a pretty simple minigame and more so a glorified QuickTime event. The most difficult part, however, is actually keeping your eyes on the button prompts because holy shit, look at Cloud go! This game is so fucking good. Cloud manages to impress Andrea enough for him to give Cloud a lovely makeover. With this new disguise acquired, Cloud and Aerith make their way to Corneo's mansion, and surprisingly, Cloud manages to blend it perfectly. He and Aerith are able to find Tifa in this underground room where she tells him why she's even at Corneo's mansion. It turns out that after Tifa and Barrett got back from the Reactor 5 bombing mission, there were goons trying to get some information on Avalanche. Tifa decided to get herself into the auditions so she can ask Corneo why exactly he was trying to figure out things about Avalanche. Everyone is called up to the front just a few moments later. Whoever Corneo picks is going to be his girl of the night, which doesn't sound good at all. Tifa seems like a shoo-in for Corneo's choice, but before he says who he picks, Cloud scoffs at him. Since Corneo seems to be into a lady with a mouth, he ends up choosing Cloud as his girl for the night, much to everyone's surprise. You know, there's something that I find pretty disappointing about the way this scene was adapted in the remake. In the original Final Fantasy VII, the general beats of the wall market content is the same. Tifa goes undercover so she can see what Corneo has planned for Avalanche, and Cloud and Aerith decides that it would be a good idea to follow suit because they don't understand what Tifa's deal is at this point. Cloud has to dress up as a woman so he can accompany Aerith into Corneo's mansion, but ends up being roped into the auditions. Here's the key difference. Cloud himself has to go around the wall market to collect any of the materials needed to pull off the disguise. All he really needs to get is the dress and the wig, then you can enter Corneo's mansion. But here's the thing. If you really want, you can go out of your way to make Cloud as attractive as possible. Sure, you can get by with just a cotton dress, but it would look much better if you had a silk dress instead. A diamond tiara would also fit well with the outfit. Just by going around the wall market before Cloud gets changed, you can find all sorts of neat ways to make his cross-dressing that much more convincing. But you know how I mentioned that in the remake, Chapter 9 has a quest that sees you going around the wall market and doing favors to get the dressmaker's inspiration back? Well, in the original game, that was all stuff that was optional to get Cloud extra goodies for when he dresses up as a woman. If you manage to get Cloud pretty enough for when he enters Corneo's mansion, the Dom will pick Cloud over Tifa and Aerith. But if you just go in with the bare minimum, Corneo will pick Tifa or Aerith for his girl of the night. You have to work for Cloud to be best girl of the group, which I think adds to the humor of the scene a lot more. It's kinda disappointing in the remake that no matter what you do, no matter what dress combination you get for him or the other girls, Cloud will always be picked as Corneo's girl. Cloud can even get super into his role in the original game. He flirts with Corneo in his own room before the big reveal. Hell, you can even say straight to Corneo's face that your one true love is Barrett, which is something that you don't get in the remake. I don't think that this interpretation is bad, but it's much less exciting since it's more scripted than before. Eventually, Tifa and Aerith will come in and stop whatever the hell Corneo had up his sleeve. The group interrogates Corneo with the threat of...
I'll cut him off.
I'll rip them off.
Or I'll smash him.
After those threats, he spills the beans. Shinra hired Corneo to find out where Avalanche is set up because they had a plan at getting back at them for blowing up 2 of their reactors. Since Corneo's men have narrowed it down to the Sector 7 slums, Shinra has a plan to take out the support beams that are holding the Sector 7 plate up in the sky. This will cause the Sector 7 plate to crash down and crush anything beneath it. Corneo activates a trapdoor after spilling the plan, and the group falls into the depths below. Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith come too, and before they know it, they're attacked by Corneo's pet, Abzu. Abzu is weak to fire magic, so Ifrit is your best summon with this battle. At this point in the game, you should also have at least tier 2 fire magic, so this fight isn't going to be too bad. These next 2 chapters have a much greater focus on the core gameplay rather than the story content, and since there isn't much in terms of gimmicks to discuss, there isn't much for me to say. Chapter 11 does have the group leave the sewers and go through the ghost train yard, which is visually pretty interesting. The ghosts here actually try to communicate with the group by drawing these strange neon images over the environment. It's mostly to help guide the player through the level. Once you're more than halfway through the chapter, you can see Shinra begin their assault on the Sector 7 support beam. At the end of Chapter 11, you fight the boss Eligor. It's interesting to note that this is the only enemy in the game that has a weapon that you can steal from it by using the steel materia. If you get lucky, you can steal Aerith's blade staff, which comes with the ability Lestra's shield. I may as well get into the weapons really quick since it's the only thing I haven't brought up about the combat system. Every weapon in the game has its own unique ability that can be used when that weapon is equipped. However, if you use the ability enough times, you can permanently learn that ability, meaning that you can equip any other weapon you want while still having access to that ability. You can also use SP to upgrade your weapons to not only improve their stats, but also give them some extra abilities like being able to survive a fatal blow once per battle, and even extra materia slots. This doesn't mean that every weapon when fully upgraded will play the same, however. They will still specialize in specific roles. Cloud's Hard Edge has the highest attack stat of any of his weapons, so if you want Cloud to be only doing physical attacks, then you should always have priority in upgrading the tree for that weapon. It's nothing too crazy. You should always be putting points into your weapons whenever you do get SP from either leveling up or finding manuscripts. It adds to the total of every weapon, so there's pretty much no point in not upgrading them, you know? Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith make their way back to Sector 7 but are interrupted by the mysterious specters once again. The group tries to fight off the threat but can't seem to make a dent. For some strange reason, the specters become very passive towards the 3 and fly off towards the tower. The 3 make their way to the base of the support pillar and see that Avalanche is knee-deep in their battle with Shinra. Wedge falls off the side of the tower but manages to catch himself by using his grappling hook. This doesn't save him for long because he loses his grip and plummets towards the ground. Wedge survives his fall but seems to be in bad shape. Cloud tells the others to stay with Wedge when he sees the specters fly up towards the tower and chases after them. On the way up the tower, Cloud comes across Biggs, who after fighting off a bunch of Shinra guards, lays on the floor wounded. He tells Cloud to make sure that what they're fighting for doesn't die in vain and the future is in his hands. Biggs passes away, succumbing to his wounds. Tifa and Aerith patch Wedge up enough so that he can move on his own. Tifa tells Aerith to get Barrett's daughter, Marlene, from the 7th heaven and move her somewhere safe. Tifa quickly gives chase to Cloud, leaving Aerith and Wedge to try to get as many people out of the slums as they can and find Marlene. Tifa eventually catches up to Cloud, and the two make their way up the support pillar while avoiding Reno and Rude's helicopter fire. Eventually, we see a scene where Jessie takes out Shinra guards with some homemade grenades. She's about to throw another one at the Shinra guns in the helicopter, but the specters appear behind her as she throws the explosive. We're not exactly sure what happened, but we know that it's bad news. When Cloud and Tifa make it to Jessie, they find her covered in debris and surrounded by the specters. They manage to get her to safety, but at this point, the damage has been done. Jessie believes that this is her punishment for making the bombs that blow up the Maka reactors. Her only regret is that she couldn't have Cloud and the others over at her mother's house for dinner one last time. She dies after giving Cloud a fist bump. Cloud and Tifa make it to the top of the support beam and find Barrett shooting at the Turks' helicopter. Reno jumps down and quickly rushes to the detonation device, but Cloud stops Reno before he can activate it. Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett ready themselves for another battle against Reno. Something interesting about this battle is that Reno has access to a few new moves, one of which being his pyramid move from the original game. Reno will trap a party member inside a pyramid, and the only way to free them is to break the pyramid by doing enough damage. About halfway through the battle, Rude will get out of his helicopter to join Reno in a 3 vs 2 battle. Reno and Rude on their own may not have anything that you can't handle, but when they work together, they're great at tag teaming your party members if you're not careful. Once the remaining members of Avalanche take down Reno and Rude, Tifa quickly rushes over to the detonation device to figure out how to disarm it. Rude makes a mad dash over to her, but Barrett opens fire on the Turk. Suddenly, the Spectres show up once again and block any of the bullets that would hit Rude. Rude manages to make it over to the device and knocks Tifa out of the way and disarms the bomb. It was at this point when I finally understood what the Spectres were doing, but I'll reveal that later. Rude manages to get Reno, and the two escape on helicopter. The group is unable to find a way to stop the detonation of the Sector 7 plate, but are contacted by the leader of the Turks, Sang. Sang shows the group that the Turks are holding Aerith captive at the Shinra HQ. He mentions that Aerith is the last of what's called an Ancient. Aerith willingly surrendered herself to the Turks in exchange for Marlene's safety. Sang cuts the call before Avalanche can ask any questions, and it's at this point when the destruction of the support pillar begins. Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett manage to escape the destruction through a zipline and just narrowly escapes the collapse. We're shown an overhead shot of the destruction of the plate, but our immersion is broken when this small cat-looking fucker just shows up out of nowhere, distraught. Spoiler alert, this is Cait Sith, one of the major party members in the original Final Fantasy VII. This is also the only scene where he appears in the game, so I guess it's supposed to be fan service. I mean, he looks as good as I imagined he would, but nevertheless, this will leave newcomers super confused and it doesn't add anything to the narrative. There's also another complaint I have with this scene, and from what I've gathered, it's a pretty common one. The collapse of the Sector 7 plate looks really good and is treated like an action set piece with our heroes narrowly escaping death, but this interpretation honestly lacks a lot of the shock value that the original scene did. Not just because we already know that the plate was going to collapse, but because of the way the scene is framed. In the remake, this scene has bombastic music, guitar solos, explosions everywhere, and so on. This is how it looked in the original game. You see what I mean? It's cold and deathly quiet. The only thing you hear are the screams of the citizens who were too unlucky to get out of the slums in time. We see the plate just crush everything beneath it before exploding in a fiery blaze. And worst of all, President Shinra watches from atop of his tower with the music playing. This meant nothing to him, and he was willing to kill hundreds of people just to get it back at Avalanche for destroying his reactors. I don't find this new interpretation to be bad, but I think the original version had this sense of dread that just wasn't recaptured. Cloud and Tifa wake up surrounded by debris and make their way to find Barrett. The two find him grieving over the loss of his comrades. Cloud and Tifa assure Barrett that Marlene is safe and back at Aerith's house, so the group makes their way there. Along the way, we get to see the reactions of the Sector 7 plate collapse from not only the Sector 6 citizens, but also the lower-ranking Shinra officers that had no idea what was going on. It shows another side of the electric company, as not all people agree to their practices. It's very minor and not much is done with it, so I assume it's just sowing the seeds for when the story is continued in the next game. The three arrive at Elmira's house where we find out that Marlene is safe, but the group has to break the bad news to Elmira that her daughter was taken by the Turks. Elmira explains that Aerith isn't her biological daughter. Many years ago, Elmira's husband enlisted in a war against a land called Wutai. Apparently, Shinra wanted to set up a Maka reactor in Wutai and the residents disagreed, which ended up escalating in a war between the two powers. Elmira's husband was on the front lines of the war, and Elmira prayed every day for his safety. One day, when Elmira waited at the train station for her husband's return, she spotted a sickly-looking woman and a young girl. The woman told Elmira to take care of Aerith before passing away in front of her child. Elmira took Aerith in, not just because she was requested to, but because she felt lonely from the absence of her husband. Aerith got along with her new adopted mother in a short amount of time. She told Elmira's stories such as how her and her mother escaped the Shinra facility, and that she wasn't too saddened from her mother's death because she returned to the planet. One day, Aerith told Elmira out of the blue to not feel sad. She told her that someone she loved dearly has passed away and that their spirit had to return to the planet before they could say goodbye. Elmira didn't believe it until she received a letter saying that her husband was killed in action. Not too long after that, Sang from the Turks came knocking on Elmira's door, asking for her to return Aerith to Shinra because she's an ancient. An ancient, or the official term Cetra, are like regular humans but they have a deep spiritual connection to the planet. This means a lot of things, but primarily, Cetra can quite literally speak to the planet. Shinra wants Aerith because not only is she the last living Cetra, but because they want to use her to find the Promised Land. Shinra believes that the Promised Land is an area filled with Mako energy, and knowing Shinra, they plan on setting up shop there and sucking the area dry. Shinra even plans on building a second Midgar, known as Neo Midgar, to make this possible. They needed Aerith to go with them willingly for their plan to work, and since Aerith surrendered herself to keep Marlene safe, their preparations are complete. Elmira begs Cloud not to do anything when he's about to rush over the Shinra HQ because she believes that if the company gets what they want, Aerith will be returned safely. Cloud and the others respect her wishes, much to Cloud's obvious discomfort, and head back to Sector 7 to try to find any survivors. They manage to get into Sector 7 thanks to the sewer shortcut that Aerith showed Cloud back at the start of Chapter 9. The group manages to find a few survivors while in Sector 7 and spot Wedge's cat. The cat guides the group down into a tunnel system where they come across Wedge, who's in terrible condition. Before the trio can reach them, the floor beneath them crumbles away and they all get separated. Interestingly enough, we take control as Barrett when he regains consciousness for this chapter. Barrett has some unique aspects to him as a leader. He can use his gun arm to blast hole in piled up debris, as well as destroy any objects that have a specific reticle. I think that this is a nice shakeup from the formula because up until this point, Cloud has been a mandatory party member for almost the entire game, minus 1 or 2 fights in Corneo's mansion. So getting a whole chapter where you have to play as Barrett with Tifa being the second party member is refreshing if you only relied on Cloud. It's also a good opportunity to refamiliarize yourself with Barrett's playstyle since he's been absent as a playable character for a large chunk of the game. Barrett and Tifa eventually make their way back to Wedge and are thankful that he's still breathing. Before they can leave, the two are ambushed by these unsettling looking creatures. Barrett and Tifa fight off a seemingly endless amount of these creatures before a creature that the game refers to as the failed experiment shows up. It's functionally the boss battle of this chapter. Cloud shows up just before the end of the fight to stagger the creature long enough for Barrett to blast it with one of his strongest attacks. The creature leaves a crack in the wall behind it, and when Barrett blasts a hole into the wall to investigate, the group is greeted by one of Shinra's hidden labs. It turns out that the swarm of creatures that attack Tifa and Barrett are actually people who have been experimented on to the point where they've mutated. Cloud has a migraine and imagines himself inside one of these incubation chambers. Before the group can investigate any further, a swarm of specters throw the group away and somehow end up back in the destroyed Sector 7 with Wedge. It's not clarified why everyone ended up here exactly, but it doesn't really matter to the plot and I just think it's a little strange. Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett bring Wedge back to Elmira's home because it's the only safe place they could think to take him. Thankfully, she's generous enough to let him rest up in the guest room until he recovers. Cloud tries to convince Elmira that Shinra is bad news and that they'll try to experiment on Aerith if they don't go to save her. Cloud seems to have a grudge against a specific scientist named Hojo, and trust me, it's for the right reasons. Hojo was a cause of a lot of shit that happened in the original story, but only has a brief appearance in the remake. Even from the first scene with Hojo, you get a glimpse of what this sick bastard will do to satiate his curiosity.
What a terrible tragedy, to lose the last of the pure-blooded ancients. Though not completely, would you like to see your mother? Albeit through the lens of one of my microscopes. Did you really think we'd leave such a precious specimen to rot in the gutter? We collected and cataloged every last bit of her. Hair, skin, organs, every fragment of every bone. As breathtaking in death as in life. As you, my dear. Ifalna was elegance, right down to her cellular structure.
I guess since Elmira doesn't know the full extent of what will happen to Aerith if Avalanche doesn't do anything, she tells them that she'll need time to think about her answer. This intro to Chapter 14 depends on the hidden relationship mechanic. Whoever you have the highest relationship with will talk to Cloud outside of Elmira's house in the middle of the night. This can be Barrett, who talks about his fellow Avalanche members that are in another branch and how he wants to introduce them to Cloud when this is all over. Tifa, who after keeping her emotions pent up finally releases them on her childhood friend and grieves over what Shinra has taken away from them all. Or Aerith, who Cloud interacts with in his dreams. She tells Cloud to live for himself and not take his life for granted. She thanks Cloud for all the things that he did for her, while also capping this off with a warning to not fall in love with her. Even if he thinks that he does, it may not be real. This is some heavy foreshadowing to a few things and plants seeds that Aerith knows more than what she's letting on. All of these scenes have one thing in common. This is where I believe Cloud's character arc is complete in the story that they're trying to tell in this game. We start off with a man who was only doing things for the good of himself, only working so that he can get cash before moving on to another job. Cloud was willing to sell out Barrett at the start of the game for the right price until he was threatened. Cloud gradually shifts into being able to enjoy himself around these people while still having priority with getting the mission done and in return paying the bills. By the time this scene rolls around, Cloud has transitioned from the gruff mercenary that kept to himself to a true friend that's not afraid of showing emotion anymore. That's what makes the start of Chapter 14 one of my favorite parts of the game. Chapter 14 is your last chance to do any side quests or prepare at shops until you finish the game. I believe that this might be the best time to talk about the post-game content since there won't be any room to do this after this chapter. Once you finish the game, you unlock the ability to revisit any chapter in the game or do any side missions that you may have missed, pick different dialogue choices to have different effects on other chapters, and most importantly, you unlock Hard Mode. Hard Mode is the pseudo New Game Plus in Final Fantasy VII Remake. The enemy stats have all been raised to match endgame levels, and some enemies even have brand new attacks to keep you on your toes. The main challenge of hard mode comes from the penalty of not being able to use items, so you have to rely on the MP you get at the start of the chapter and the sum you may find when breaking Shinra containers. Hard mode will give you manuscripts whenever you do a specific thing in the chapter, such as when beating a boss you may get a manuscript for someone like Tifa. As I said earlier, manuscripts are essential for getting SP to upgrade your weapons because once you hit the level cap, you have to earn manuscripts to gain SP. I would say that getting manuscripts is a good enough incentive to go through hard mode since the extra SP you gain is pretty much required for some of the last arena battles in the game. The last two arena battles are available once you've done all of Chadley's requests and once you finish all the other arena battles before those. These can only be taken on hard mode, so the odds are stacked against you. The first one isn't so bad. You have to fight the more unique enemies such as the Tonberry and the Fireball. I would say the hardest part about this gauntlet is the rematch against the Behemoth because in hard mode, he does a lot more damage. Not even the usually infamous Malboro is that challenging. Its signature move, Bad Breath, inflicts whatever gets hit by it with every status ailment in the game at the same time, but it's very easy to avoid since it has a pretty short range and there's a lot of wind up to the move. The final challenge, however, is a completely different story. This is a 5-round tournament against every summon in the game, followed by a brand new boss at the end of the gauntlet. You battle through the summons in this order: Shiva, Fat Chocobo, Leviathan, and Bahamut. The first three, while requiring you to pay attention, isn't super difficult. Sometimes they can catch you off guard with their ultimate attacks, but at this point in the game, you'll have the required HP to survive the unavoidable moves. The battle against Bahamut is, without a doubt, the hardest encounter in the game. Bahamut has a unique attribute to his attacks compared to the other summons. His attacks are all classified under being non-elemental magic, meaning that there's no way to resist the damage. Bahamut has the most aggressive moveset out of all the summons, as well as the most annoying attacks to deal with, one being his Umbral Strike ability. Umbral Strikes makes Bahamut throw 2 massive balls of energy at whoever you're currently in control as and cannot be blocked. The only way to avoid taking damage is by somehow evading both attacks with well-timed dodge rolls. I have never successfully avoided both energy balls after multiple attempts. The thing that makes Bahamut such a pain in the ass is his ultimate attack, Mega Flare. Before Mega Flare is fired off, Bahamut will count down from 5. This doesn't mean 5 seconds, but it means 5 rounds of charging, if that makes any sense. Once Bahamut reaches 0, he'll use Mega Flare, which is an unavoidable, unblockable attack on the entire party. This is the move that makes or breaks the fight. Bahamut has the capacity of annihilating everyone in your party, unless you make sure that the weapons you have equipped on your team have the Reprieve skill. Reprieve makes it so that you can survive an otherwise fatal blow once per battle. Bahamut also has one more trick up his sleeve. Once he's below half health, he'll perform a summon of his own and bring Ifrit into the battle with him. This pretty much makes giving your up-close attackers the Materia combination to block fire damage a requirement. This makes Ifrit a complete joke since you block all of his attacks. Bahamut has the capacity of using Mega Flare multiple times in the fight, but you can interrupt him if he tries doing it again by staggering him. It's impossible to stagger Bahamut before he does Mega Flare for the first time. This fight alone took me hours of preparation, and I was absolutely afraid to see what the secret boss was going to be just because if your party is knocked out in the tournament, you have to restart from the very beginning. So you should have seen the look on my face when I got to the secret boss to find out that this is one of the easiest encounters in the game. I'm not kidding. I think that the Pride and Joy prototype is actually very easy in comparison to most of the battles since he uses fire attacks a lot. I just so happen to be immune to fire because of my materia, so we didn't do any damage unless it was a physical attack. Sure, Pride and Joy has a move that can deal 9,999 damage to a single party member, but can be interrupted by crippling his legs. So if you ask me, the true super boss was the Bahamut rematch and Pride and Joy was more of a victory lap. The accessory you get from beating the final tournament is super cool. This thing makes it so that you always start the battle with a full limit bar, and you fill your limit bar much faster than normal. It's a bit of a useless reward because there's no challenges after finishing this battle other than doing hard mode, which you probably already finished by the time you got to this fight. But hey, it's a cool reward at least. Chapter 14 features the most egregious form of filler content. The group heads back to Don Corneo's mansion to try to wrangle a way to get on top of the Sector 7 plate, but they run into one of his lackeys, Leslie. Leslie says that Corneo isn't here, but he'll help out Avalanche if he does him a solid. Leslie wants to find and kill Corneo because he chose Leslie's fiancée as his girl of the night. Leslie never saw her after that night, and now he wants revenge for what Corneo did. It's an interesting story, but we don't exactly get to know much about Leslie besides his motivation. It also doesn't help that you mainly travel through the sewers of Chapter 10 again with very little changes. Hell, we even fight Abzu again without any game-changing differences. I think that this was probably the lowest point in the game when it comes to pacing as well. It's a pretty irrelevant chapter to the story that's being told, and while I think Leslie's story is fine, I just want to get to the finale at this point, you know? Leslie supplies the group with grapple guns so they can scale the destroyed Sector 7 and makes his leave. Once everyone has gotten the supplies they need, they begin their ascension up to the collapsed Sector 7 plate. The group runs into a few complications on the way, but they eventually make their way to the Shinra HQ. Cloud, Tifa, and Barret hide on top of one of the supply trucks that's heading towards the garage. Barret and Tifa fall off the truck when they are almost inside, so the group has to take the head-on approach to get inside Shinra's lobby. There's an interesting choice you can make once the trio manages to grab the keycard from the reception desk. Either you can choose to take the elevator up to the 59th floor, or you can take the sneaky backdoor entrance to floor 59. The former is much faster, but the elevator will be stopped by Shinra guards, causing you to get into some encounters before reaching the top. While the latter will be the safest option, but will take the longest since you need to climb up all 59 flights of stairs. This is a choice that is directly adapted from the original game. Picking the stairs is definitely my preferred choice since it's one of the best jokes in the entire game. I wasn't lying when I said you have to climb up every step of the way, you really have to. The group starts off at a full sprint and it's sort of a mini race as well. Right next to their names on the bottom right of the screen, it will list the current floor that each party member is on. The further on you go, the more exhausted everyone will get. You go from max speed to a medium jog, all the way down to a slow stumble once you're at the top. If you pay attention to each floor, you can even see that Tifa takes breaks once she's far enough ahead. The best part has to be Barret's dialogue. The usually tough as a brick leader slowly crumbles as he realizes how far he actually has to climb up. He'll even start singing out of misery once he's near the top of the stairs.
Another day, another struggle. Climbing stairs, so much trouble.
It's really great to see that this scene was kept intact. The three make their way through the Shinra building trying to find out where Hojo is keeping Aerith and pass through a holographic tour guide on the way. The group is shown what Shinra's plans for finding the Cetra's Promised Land are and how they want to use the Mako energy to build a more advanced Midgar. The tour ends, but the group is suddenly shown a vision of the city of Midgar being destroyed by a giant meteor. Cloud sees both Tifa and Barret being killed by Sephiroth before we cut to black. I believe that Tifa and Barret only saw the meteor falling but didn't see the vision of Sephiroth because they only question the former when the group comes to. It's never brought up again, so it feels like a bit of loose storytelling just for the case of showing iconic imagery. Maybe this will be followed up in another game, but as of right now, it feels very awkward. Cloud, Tifa, and Barret eventually find out that President Shinra and other representatives will be holding a meeting to discuss Aerith very shortly. So Cloud does some recon work by sneaking through the air vents. Cloud manages to spot Hojo in the meeting room and overhears his plans to have Aerith reproduce. At first, Hojo suggests that they use candidates from Soldier before becoming infatuation with the idea of a crossbred specimen. Like I said, Hojo is a sick bastard. The group tails Hojo until he leads them all to his laboratory. Barret puts him at gunpoint and forces Hojo to take them to where he's holding Aerith. Hojo contemplates that using the corpses of her friends will do the trick in emotionally scarring her. Before the group can question what he means by that, Hojo sicks his creations on them and makes his escape. The group eventually finds Aerith's holding cell as well as Hojo up inside his observation chamber. It's at this point where Hojo recognizes Cloud. At first, he believed that he was in Soldier because of the Mako poisoning in his eyes, but after getting a better look at Cloud, Hojo drops the biggest truth bomb out of all of them. He reveals to everyone in the room that Cloud was never a part of Soldier. This causes Cloud to have a migraine before the Spectres show up once again and forcefully drag Hojo away from the group. This revelation is fucking huge, and has the potential to greatly alter the story from here on out. I won't get too much into it here because there's a lot of context that's needed in order to fully grasp how exactly this will change the story as a whole. No one else in the group questions what Hojo meant by Cloud never being a soldier, so I can only assume that this will be addressed in future installments. That's one of the biggest complaints I have with this finale. There's a lot of things that are introduced to the story that doesn't have an effect on the current plot, but will be important in future installments. I don't mind one or two things being foreshadowed, or introducing some concepts that'll work as a hook for future installments, but there are a lot of things that make their first appearance near the end of the game without much explanation, such as this guy right here. This is Red 13. Red 13 was captured and experimented on by Hojo, and holds a grudge against the scientist. Before Red 13 can attack the group, Aerith places her hand on him and seems to calm him down with a spell or maybe something else. Red 13 says that he got his nickname from Hojo, who branded the number 13 on his body. Tifa questions if Red 13 has another name, but he doesn't seem to want to talk about it. Cloud begins to walk uncontrollably towards the elevator, and this is done in gameplay. No matter what direction you point the analog stick, Cloud will move towards the elevator. We're shown flashes of some parasitic creature inside a test tube, and Cloud begins to mutter the name Jenova to himself. Cloud reaches the elevator, but passes out when he refers to the creature as his mother. When Cloud comes to, he finds himself with the others inside a room that Aerith and her mother stayed in while being held by Shinra. Barrett says to everyone else to take Aerith and get out while he stays behind and tries to take down Shinra on his own. Aerith warns Barrett not to do that, and suddenly, more specters arrive inside the room. This is where the truth of the mysterious creatures are finally revealed. Red 13 says that these specters are called Whispers. The Whispers are arbiters of fate. You see, the planet has a destiny already set in stone, and the Whisper's duty is to keep everything in order so the planet's destiny is fulfilled. This means everything from Cloud meeting Aerith in the slums, Cloud going on the Reactor 5 bombing mission, the death of Avalanche members, all of that and more are events that are set in stone. This explains why whenever something is about to happen in the remake that will deviate from the original, it is interrupted and corrected by the Whispers. Remember back when Cloud is about to kill Reno after their first fight? Before he can land the killing blow, both Cloud and Aerith are dragged away from the fight because Reno isn't supposed to die there. Depending on how you interpret what the Whispers represent, you can come to some interesting conclusions. The most popular theory is that the Whispers are a meta-commentary for fans of the original Final Fantasy VII who don't want to see anything from the original story changed. This also tells us more about Aerith and the secrets that she intentionally kept from the group. I believe that Aerith knew about the Whispers the entire time and knew what their purpose was. She is a Cetra after all and can communicate with the planet. This is why when she touches Red 13's forehead, suddenly he knows all about the Whispers as well. Aerith transferred the knowledge onto him. The general idea behind the Whispers is clear, but what exactly constitutes as a big deviation from the original plot is pretty ambiguous. The biggest one being Wedge surviving. When Wedge fell off the Sector 7 support beam in the original game, that was it. He died right there and then. But in the remake, he doesn't die, so there's already a difference. But what I personally think is that whether or not Wedge lives or dies doesn't matter to the planet's predetermined fate, because Wedge stays in a comatose state for the rest of the game until he shows up again near the end when he says that he's getting help from other Avalanche cores to flush President Shinra out of the building. Functionally, this is still the same destiny that the planet has in mind because Wedge isn't changing much of anything. In fact, he's keeping things directly on course because Wedge is the reason why the group has to go to the rooftops like they do in the original game. So I feel as though death means less to the planet's plan unless it's necessary to keep everything on the proper course. Something that I believe supports this theory later on is when President Shinra is hanging off the edge of Shinra HQ. It doesn't matter if he falls to his death now or is killed later. What matters is that he dies at all because that's when Shinra's son Rufus takes over as president for the company, which is why we don't see any Whispers in this scene. Wedge's fate by the end of the game is left ambiguous because he's seemingly thrown out of the Shinra HQ window when the game cuts to black and we hear glass shattering. I believe that since Wedge fulfilled his purpose in correcting destiny, him being alive any longer could cause some problems. This theory of mine could be completely wrong, and it's not a good thing that I have to think up of a conclusion of how something specifically functions in a story when the information seemingly contradicts itself. I believe that not explaining what exactly counts as a deviation of fate makes Wedge living much more confusing, and that's not okay when this is one of the core reasons as to why your story happens. Anyways, Wedge gets in contact with the group and informs them that he managed to get other cores of Avalanche to raid the building to try to flush Shinra out. He also lets them know that they have sent a helicopter to extract a group when they make it to the rooftops. Since the building has gone under lockdown, the five need to cut through Hojo's laboratory so they can make it to the roof. As the group makes their way through the lab, they come across Jenova in a capsule. Suddenly, Cloud has another migraine before Sephiroth appears before the group. Cloud rushes towards Sephiroth out of anger, but is unable to land a blow on him and is thrown down into the depths below. Cloud comes to and realizes that he was separated from the others during the fall. This is probably the second worst example of having filler during a point where the action is supposed to be high. It was at this point where I just wanted the game to end, not because I was sick of it, but because the story was at its climax, so it's pretty draining to have to go through another hour of regular gameplay. There are some interesting things here though that make it at least memorable. Cloud will eventually reunite with both Barret and Red 13. Red 13 isn't exactly a fully fledged party member in this game, he's more so just an extended cameo. He's entirely AI'd control, so he'll fight on his own and has his own materia equipped. It's more so just a quick taste of what he'll have to offer when we get the chance to control him in later installments. Kind of sucks, but I understand why they did it. The other unique aspect to this section is the fact that you switch between two parties. You play as Cloud and Barret for a bit before switching to Tifa and Aerith in an attempt to help each other progress. It's a lot less interesting than it sounds because it mostly just amounts to playing as one team for a bit before having to switch to another team to just pull a switch or something. Red 13 goes from Cloud and Barret's team to Tifa and Aerith after he gets knocked off of a platform. It's not that this section is terrible, but it's pretty annoying considering how long it goes on for. There's even a boss battle that attempts to take advantage of the fact that you have two teams in different rooms, but it dies so quickly it doesn't leave much of a lasting impression. The group is able to meet up and take the elevator back up to they were before, only to discover that Jenova is missing from her test tube with a stream of purple blood making a path. They follow the trail until it's cut off right at President Shinra's office. The group finds Shinra dangling from the top of the tower and begs Avalanche to rescue him. Barret grabs Shinra and saves his life, but he intimidates him to get on TV and tell the truth that Shinra was responsible for the Sector 7 plate collapse and Avalanche is a force of good trying to save the planet. Barret gets too caught up in his own speech to notice Shinra pull a gun on him. Before he can pull the trigger, he's stabbed in the back by none other than Sephiroth. Suddenly, whispers flood the room and try to prevent Barret from attacking, but Sephiroth manages to get past the whispers and stab Barret right through the chest.
Barret!
The pure horror on Cloud's face sells this scene perfectly. Barret is caught by the whispers and is instantly treated by some sort of magic. Sephiroth suddenly transforms into a form of Jenova, creating an illusion of an arena in the process. To properly damage Jenova, you need to cut off both of its tentacles because they swat at you when you try to apply pressure. Once the tentacles are gone, that doesn't make Jenova defenseless as it can still do some attacks. As the fight goes on, Jenova will pull some nasty tricks such as having tentacles sprout out from the ground to attack, as well as spatting out some acidic black gunk. Once Jenova is defeated, it transforms into Marco before dying, leaving the body of Jenova behind. Before Cloud can reach Jenova, Sephiroth appears again and takes her away. Cloud gives chase, but is unable to catch up to Sephiroth before he escapes due to the whispers blocking Cloud's path. As Sephiroth falls, he briefly turns into the cloaked man that Cloud and Aerith found earlier. As I said earlier, these cloaked characters are never explained in this game, so their purpose or what exactly they are will come across as confusing for those who haven't played the original. In fact, this information is kind of overwhelming since there's already so much going on in this finale, and as I mentioned before, that's the weakest aspect of these last few chapters. I get that this is all consequence of cutting up a complete story into multiple parts, but nevertheless, it's still a problem. Avalanche's extraction helicopter arrives but is shot down by a missile from a Shinra helicopter. This is Rufus Shinra, the former president's son and heir to the Shinra company. Seeing that this will probably be the best chance, Barret suggests that they all take on Rufus right now to end the Shinra family, but Cloud requests Barret and everyone else get out while they can. Cloud is putting the safety of his friends above himself so that they at least have the chance to escape if he's unable to defeat Rufus. Barret reluctantly obeys Cloud's order and everyone takes their leave. Rufus is a unique encounter in the sense that for the first half of the fight, you're recommended to fight his companion Darkstar. Whenever Rufus receives damage, Darkstar will cast Kiraga on Rufus, leaving him open to attack. Once you manage to defeat Darkstar, it will be a one-on-one encounter with the new president. Rufus will reload his weapon once he spends enough shots doing his special abilities. He's essentially a glass cannon. Rufus can output massive damage, but if you're able to land any powerful attack on him, he goes down really easily. Rufus manages to make his escape on helicopter and Cloud is shot at by the pilot. The platform beneath him breaks and Cloud ends up hanging for his life. As he loses his grip, Tifa comes in the nick of time and saves Cloud from falling. Aerith, Barret, and Red 13 make their way to the bottom floor, but are hard-pressed to find an escape route as there are too many Shinra guards outside for all of them to take care of. Harbinger comes in, taunting Avalanche. He commands the guards to kill Barret and Red 13, but to leave Aerith alive. Just before they get their hands dirty, however, Cloud surprises everyone by jumping from one of the upper floors with a motorcycle and takes out some of the Shinra guards with it. Tifa also arrives in a vehicle of her own. With the escape plan hatched, the group makes their way through the Shinra HQ before coming across their exit. That's when Cloud does the sickest shit ever. The group stops when they notice that the Shinra HQ is surrounded by whispers. Everyone questions what they're trying to do, and not even Aerith has the answer. The group isn't able to think about it for too long, since before they know it, more Shinra guards make their way towards the group with vehicles of their own. Thus, the iconic chase scene begins. The motorcycle set piece here is a bit better than the one in Chapter 4 for the sole reason that there's a lot more enemy variety, as well as different obstacles that you need to avoid. There's even a boss fight this time around, which is pretty basic. You have to do enough damage to its wheels to stagger it. That's when you're able to wail on it with your spinning slash attack to deal as much damage as possible. Though I think that this set piece worked better in the original game because it's significantly shorter, and funnily enough, it controls better. I have a harder time in the remake moving the motorcycle forwards for some reason. It's as if there are invisible barriers so you don't go too far ahead. I can't be the only one that feels like this, right? The group manages to outrun Shinra, but the celebration is cut short when Sephiroth appears at the end of the road, causing the group to stop. Everyone approaches Sephiroth, and he says that everyone born to the planet is bound by its fate. Suddenly, the whispers rush away from Shinra HQ and towards our heroes. Some whispers surround the group, and they're suddenly shown a vision. In this vision, we see Midgar surrounded by whispers, and are shown a mysterious soldier wielding the same Buster Sword that Cloud has been using for years. This is Zack Fair. Zack is one of Cloud's buddies back when he worked for Shinra. To pull back the curtain a bit, what we're seeing now is actually Zack's fate, because this is his final battle, which results in his death. We even see that the whispers are in the area because Zack's death is very important to Cloud, and by extension, the planet's destiny. This finale relies heavily on knowing the original game's story inside and out. It rewards old fans who've been playing the game since they were kids, but this comes with the price of being very inaccessible to newcomers. Before we can see the battle, we're brought back to the current time and see Sephiroth cut a hole through the whispers, inviting Cloud to battle him on the other side. Cloud rushes in almost instantly, but is stopped by Aerith because of fearing the unknown. Aerith warns everyone of Sephiroth's power and that he's the planet's biggest threat. She implies that Sephiroth has some sort of immunity to the Whisper's power, so it's going to be up to them to stop Sephiroth from destroying the planet. This will come with consequences, however, because if they all go and battle Sephiroth now, they'll be defying the fate the planet has in store for everyone. If everyone joins in and destroys fate, they have a chance of beating Sephiroth and saving the planet from its own demise. It's important to note that the characters have no idea what fate has in store for them. Throughout the game, Cloud was giving glimpses into the future. It's why we're shown things such as the reunion of the cloaked figures, Aerith's death, and even a giant meteorite crashing directly into the planet. These visions paint a very bleak future with the death of everyone. The best course of action would be to literally destroy this prophesized future in an attempt to save the world from Sephiroth, who is seen as the cause of all this. With everything decided, the group heads into the portal after Sephiroth. On the other side, they're greeted by this titan known as the Whisper Harbinger. Think of it as the collective hive for the whispers that's taken the shape of a giant monster. The battle against Fate is an interesting one in the sense that you don't directly fight the Whisper Harbinger. You mostly fight these whispers that have forms inspired by Cloud, Tifa, and Barret. The red one uses a sword, the blue one uses fists, and the yellow one uses guns. If you analyze these creatures, the descriptions say that they're entities from the future that manifested in the present day to fight and preserve the future they came from. This has implications that we're fighting Cloud, Tifa, and Barret from the future as they want to preserve the original fate for the world. Every time the group defeats one of the entities, they're shown a glimpse of what the future has in store for them, such as seeing Cloud and Sephiroth battling each other, Aerith's burial, and Red 13 running through the world with his children. With their combined effort, the group manages to take down the Whisper Harbinger and are brought to a mysterious area. It's at this point where Sephiroth reveals himself to everyone. Sephiroth uses his power to throw a building at the group, forcing them to separate. Sephiroth and Cloud both land on a piece of rubble, and the final battle commences with a one-on-one fight. Sephiroth is very aggressive and will leave himself open to attacks if he ends up missing any of his hard-hitting moves. If Sephiroth isn't attacking, it's best not to be aggressive yourself because he's able to defend against all your sword swings and will not take any damage because of it. What's interesting about this battle is that every time you make it to a new phase of the fight, a team member will join alongside you. What teammate you get is based on a hidden score value that was tallied up in the fight before. Whoever has the two highest scores will be your partners in this fight. I personally got Tifa and Barret for this battle. Sephiroth has an instant kill move near the end of the fight. It's shown that he seemingly has some sort of control over the whispers and uses that power to summon the meteorite from the visions. When this happens, you need to defeat him before the counter hits 0. If you run out of time, the meteor will crash and that's an instant game over. No matter what team you get, the group manages to overpower Sephiroth. Everyone acts as support by taking down the whispers surrounding Sephiroth, while Cloud charges at him to deal the final blow. Sephiroth, strangely enough, lets Cloud attack him, causing a massive explosion of light. Cloud and Sephiroth are teleported to what is known as the Edge of Creation. Cloud begins to have a migraine because this whole scenario is giving him deja vu. Sephiroth offers Cloud one more chance to join him and defy destiny together, but Cloud is firm in his stance to kill Sephiroth. With that, the two begin their final battle. Sephiroth manages to overpower Cloud after toying with him, claiming that it isn't time for them to end this yet. Sephiroth taunts Cloud one more time before disappearing, leaving a single black feather in his place. With the Whispers officially destroyed, a new detail is revealed. The vision that we were shown of Zack's last battle was actually from an alternate timeline, symbolized through the logo of Shinra's mascot, Stamp, being a different breed of animal. Since the Whispers are destroyed across all of time and space, in this reality, Zack actually manages to survive his encounter against Shinra. He takes the alternate reality Cloud back to Midgar. That's not the only thing that's shown, however. It's heavily implied that these two timelines have been merged into one with the defeat of the Whispers. We're shown that Biggs actually survived the Sector 7 plate collapse, and it's also implied that Jessie did too because we see her gloves on the dresser. The game ends with Cloud deciding that he needs to leave Midgar because Sephiroth is still out there somewhere. The other members all agree that they need to take him down for the sake of the planet, and they all begin their journey. The credits even state the fact that their unknown journey will continue. And that is the end of the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. There is a lot to unpack with this ending, while at the same time, there is plenty of things that were intentionally left ambiguous so Square Enix could hook players into checking out how the story will continue. The biggest thing to take away from this ending is the fact that with the destruction of the Whisper Harbinger, not everything will play out the same as expected. This is to open up new opportunities of storytelling on the developer's end, but this also has some big ramifications on the game world itself. I believe that this was Sephiroth's plan all along. It's very clear that Sephiroth knows something that we as the audience don't. He is somehow able to resist the Whisper's power and even control them in some cases. I think that Sephiroth was manipulating the group into destroying the Whispers because he used his control over the beings to selectively show events as if the planet was doomed, which is why we only see events such as Aerith's death and the meteor wiping out the planet. This was to convince everyone that Sephiroth needed to be stopped right away, and the only way to do that was to destroy Fate. What the characters don't know is that Sephiroth was actually destined to lose, so they inadvertently opened up the opportunity for him to win in the end. Since they introduced the fact that there were multiple timelines, I think that the Sephiroth we fought at the end of the game isn't the same one we've been seeing up until that point. I believe the final boss Sephiroth is from another timeline where he lost in the end. So he traveled to this new timeline and along the way discovered what the Whispers were. So he managed to manipulate everyone into killing them so he had a new chance at winning. My theory could totally be wrong, but that's the thing. Now this story has become unknown. There's now room for speculation and theory since because things can be different, there's now stakes in the story again. Let's face it, everyone knows that Aerith was going to die. It's the video game death. But now, it's left up in the air whether or not she'll meet her tragic end. Hell, if they really want to throw a curveball, Tifa could be the one who gets axed off. Character safety isn't guaranteed anymore. That doesn't mean that I think the plot going forward is going to be entirely different. I just can't see Square Enix going without adapting more iconic scenes from the original game. Even the end of the remake ends the same way the original Midgar section ended, with the group going out to find Sephiroth. The first thing I'd want to see in part 2 would be some clarifications and explanations on the more ambiguous parts of the ending. While I think that this ending is great, it relies too heavily on knowledge from the original game to be accessible. You pretty much have to play the original game to fully understand what exactly happens. A lot of things are also just left unclear for the sake of expansion and sequels. I also feel bad for those who just wanted a one-to-one remake with updated visuals. I can see why there's disappointment surrounding the fact that there will be deviations now, but I think writing them all off as terrible without even seeing what they'll do with the idea is just silly. That original story still exists, and it's easily accessible. I appreciate the fact that Square is willing to take big risks with their most popular game while others would just play it safe. Sure, the remake isn't perfect, far from it. There's some things that I prefer in the original game, and the pacing could use a lot of improvements, but I think that the remake excels in so many aspects and even surpasses the original in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean that the original game is obsolete. There's still plenty of reasons to go and play that one too. Final Fantasy VII Remake is just an adaptation of the original game, and both stand on their own as solid RPGs. I, for one, am very excited to see where this new journey will take us. All eyes are on you, Square. You better not fuck this up. Hey, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're a fan of this type of content. This video took a lot of time and effort to make, so any feedback would be appreciated. If you're a fan of these long-form reviews, I have one for the PS2 game Persona 3 FES up on my channel as well. Also, thank you to everyone who's been sticking by me for a while. I'm almost at 800 subscribers at the time of this recording, which is pretty insane to think about. I'd also like to thank you, the viewer, for getting this far into the video. It means a lot that you'd stick by my side for this long. I'd also like to thank my good pal Nolan, or That Boy Aqua, for the assistance with this video. He makes really good videos on Ubisoft games, primarily the Assassin's Creed games. A link to his channel will be in the description. This video has gone on for long enough, so thank you for watching and take care!